Empire of Ashes. Episode 2, The Vow. Written by Mia. They dressed me like a queen for a wedding that was really a transfer of property, and I let them because a woman learns early that the costume you are put in tells you exactly what role you are expected to play, and the moment you understand the role, you can decide how to ruin it. The dress came from Milan in a box lined with tissue, and it cost more than my father's funeral. Sophia brought it to me herself. They had given me a suite on the second floor of the East Wing, 3 times the size of the flat I'd grown up in, with a view of the gardens and a lock on the door that I noticed, the first night, only worked from the outside. Everything in it was beautiful, and nothing in it was mine. There were dresses already hung in the wardrobe in my exact size. They had measured me somehow, before I ever said yes, and books on the shelves chosen by someone who had decided what a young wife should read, and fresh flowers a silent woman replaced each morning before I woke. It was the most comfortable cage ever built, and they had built it before I agreed to enter it, which told me the agreeing had never really been the point. I understood the message of those rooms perfectly. You are valuable now. Valuable things are kept. Kept things do not leave. I had not expected to like anyone in that house. I had built myself for 3 months on the assumption that everyone behind the Marchetti gates was a version of the thing that had killed my father, and it is harder to hate people once you're standing close enough to see them breathe. Sophia Marchetti was 23 and sharp as a dropped knife, and she sat on the end of the bed while a silent woman pinned me into Milan and watched me with her brother's dark eyes and absolutely none of his stillness. "You're prettier than the last one they tried to marry him to," she said. "And you haven't cried once. The last one cried so much they had to redo her face twice." She tilted her head. "Are you stupid? Or are you brave? Or are you up to something? Would I tell you if it was the third?" Sophia grinned, quick and real. "No," she said, approving. "You wouldn't. Good." She stood and circled me once, the way her brother circled things, and I filed that away, that whatever I did in this house, there were 2 sets of those reading dark eyes in it, not one. A piece of advice, since no one's going to give you any and I'm bored. Dario doesn't care if you love him. He's not a romantic. The family beat that out of him before he was your age. What he can't stand, she stopped at the door, considering me, is being managed. He'd forgive you almost anything before he'd forgive being handled like a fool. So if you are up to something, sister, be cleverer than you think you need to be. He's cleverer than he lets the room see. Then she was gone, and I stood in a dead stranger's idea of a wedding dress and understood that I had just been given, by an enemy, the single most useful thing anyone had told me since my father died. The wedding was held in the old cathedral on the hill, and it was not a wedding. It was a coronation and a warning and an invoice all at once. Every pew was full. I recognized faces from my father's funeral, the senators, the bishops, the harbor men, the ones who had done their arithmetic and stayed away from the grave of Aldo Russo and had come, every single one, to watch his daughter marry into the family that had ruined him. That was the point of it. The Marchettis were not marrying me. They were standing in the highest, holiest room in the city and demonstrating, to everyone who mattered, that they could take a proud man's whole life and his only child and fold them into the family inventory, in public, with a choir. No one comes to a wedding like that for love. They come the way you come to a launching to see how big the ship is. I had dressed for my own funeral once already that month, in my mind, standing over my father's grave. Now I dressed for it again, in white. That is what a wedding like this one is. Once you strip the choir and the candles away, a funeral for the person you were allowed to be before, conducted in front of everyone who profits from the change. The bishop who officiated had taken Marchetti money. I had seen his name in my father's ledger, 2 lines below a harbor official and a sum. The choir was paid. The flowers were a statement of liquidity. And every guest in every pew had come to witness the same single fact made holy, that there was no power in this city the family could not reach into a church and bless. I made myself look at them as I waited at the back. All those important faces turned to watch me walk, and I made myself a cold promise to match the one from the small hours. You came to watch me be swallowed. Stay in your seats. One day you will have come to watch something else entirely, and you will not know it until it is done. I walked the long aisle alone because there was no one left to give me away, and I felt 300 pairs of eyes counting the cost of me. And at the end of it, Dario Marchetti waited in front of the altar in a suit like a closed door, and watched me come the way he watched everything, steadily reading. And here is the part one did not plan for. The part one have turned over 100 times since, looking for where I went wrong. When I reached him, when I stopped at the altar with the whole rotten city watching and put my cold hand into his, Dario leaned down under the cover of the choir, so close his breath moved the hair at my temple, and he said very low, for no one but me, "Breathe. You've gone white. Whatever you're afraid of in here, it's not the next 10 minutes. I promise you that much. Just the next 10 minutes. It was such a strange, human thing to say. Not smile for them. Not don't embarrass the family. He had looked at me across that vast performance and seen, under the Milan and the steadiness I was so proud of, that I was 19 and orphaned and terrified, and the man my family had taught me to fear had chosen, in the middle of his own coronation, to tell me to breathe. I hated him for it.
I want to be clear about that.
I hated that the first kindness anyone had shown me since the grave had come from him, that it had been real, that my body believed it before my mind could stop it, that something in my chest unclenched at his voice the way you cannot help, the way a hand opens in warm water. I had built 3 months of cold resolve on the belief that he was simply a monster, because a monster is a clean thing to destroy. And in 10 seconds at the altar, he had shown me he was something worse, something far more dangerous to my purpose. He was a monster who could be kind. He was a man. We said the words. I do not remember most of them. I remember that his hand was warm and steady around mine, and that mine had stopped shaking traitorously, and that when he slid the ring onto my finger, he did it gently, watching my face, as though my comfort were a thing he was responsible for. I remember the priest pronouncing us and the choir rising, and 300 faces turning to memorize the moment the Russo name was finally, formally swallowed. And I remember thinking, with a clarity that frightened me more than the cathedral did, he is going to be so much harder to ruin than I let myself believe. And I'm going to have to ruin him anyway. The reception was at the compound, and that was the first time I saw the house I had married myself into in order to take apart. It was beautiful in the way of a held breath. Old money laid over older blood, marble and oil paintings, and quiet men in good suits at every door. I drank 1 glass of champagne and pretended to drink 3, and I let the city's important people kiss my cheek and call me Mrs. Marchetti, and the whole time I was doing what I had come there to do, which was to learn the geography of the place, which corridors the guards stood in, which doors needed 2 men, and which needed none, where Dario's study was the real one, not the one for show, because a man who runs an empire keeps his ledgers somewhere, and somewhere in this house, I was certain, the Marchetti version of my father's book was waiting, and I had 3 months' practice now at reading the things careful men hide. So I worked the room the way my father had taught me to work a manifest, methodically, pleasantly, missing nothing. I let a senator hold my hand too long and tell me how lovely the ceremony had been, and over his shoulder I counted the doors off the great hall and marked which the staff used and which the guards. I accepted the kiss of a woman dripping diamonds who had not come to my father's grave, and while she talked, I watched a man in a plain dark suit murmur something to Dario and then leave through a door near the library that no guest used, and I filed that door away. I learned that the house turned in on itself like a shell, the public rooms bright and open, and behind them reached through a single guarded corridor, the private wing where the family actually lived and worked and, I had to assume, kept its secrets. I learned that Dario's study stood at the end of that corridor because 3 different people glanced toward that one door when his name came up, and people's eyes go to power the way water finds the low place. I did not go near it. Not that night. A clever woman does not pick a lock her first night in the house. She lets them watch her be harmless until the watching becomes a habit and then a boredom, and the day they stop counting her steps is the day she begins. I had time. I had, in fact, nothing left but time, and a coat with 300 photographs sewn into its lining, and a husband across the room who kept looking at me as though I were a lock he intended to enjoy opening. It was Nico who caught me looking. He was Dario's underboss, an older man with a boxer's patience and eyes that missed nothing, and I found him beside me at the tall window without having heard him cross the room. "Big house," he said pleasantly, looking out at the same dark corridor I had been measuring. "Easy to get lost in. You'll want to be careful the first weeks. Some doors in this family open the wrong way." He turned that patient gaze on me, and under the pleasantness was a flat, professional cold. A girl could wander somewhere she didn't mean to, and there'd be no explaining it. "You understand me, Mrs. Marchetti. I'd hate for there to be an accident so soon after a funeral." He knew. Not everything, but he knew enough to be watching, and I understood that Sophia's warning had been generous and incomplete. There were not 2 sets of reading eyes in this house. There were many, and at least one of them had already decided I was a problem to be solved before I became one. I smiled my grateful bride smile and said something soft, and Nico nodded and drifted away, and I stood at the window with my false 3rd glass of champagne and my real fear, and I thought, all right, so they're watching. So it's harder than I planned. Nothing about this was ever going to be easy. And then, across the bright, cruel reception, I felt the weight of attention that I was already, after only a day, learning to recognize, and I looked up and Dario was watching me from across the room. Not the way Nico watched, not the way the guards watched. He was watching me the way he had at the cemetery and the restaurant and the altar, steadily, reading, as though I were the single most interesting figure in a sum he had not yet finished working. And when our eyes met, he did not look away, and neither did I, and the noise of 300 people fell away to nothing, and something passed between us across that crowded room that had no place at all in my careful plan, something that was not fear, and was not hatred, and was, God help me, a kind of recognition. He lifted his glass, the smallest fraction. "I see you." I lifted mine back. "And I see you." It should have frightened me more than Nico's threat at the window, and in a way it did. Nico I understood. Nico was a danger with edges, a man with a job, and dangers with edges can be measured and slipped. But the thing that crossed the room when Dario Marchetti looked at me had no edges I could find. It did not want to solve me or bury me. It wanted to know me patiently, completely, the way he wanted to know everything he meant to keep, and some traitor part of me, starved for 19 years and orphaned for 9 days, leaned toward being known the way the whole cathedral of guests had leaned toward the spectacle. I had come into this house to read its secrets. It had not once occurred to me, until that look across the crowd, that the house might intend to read mine. Neither of us, I think, yet understood that those were the most dangerous words either of us had ever said, and that we had said them without a single sound, across a wedding that was supposed to be a transfer of property, on the night I moved into the house I had sworn to burn. To be continued. That was episode 2 of Empire of Ashes. If this one has its hooks in you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus Dario POV bonus scenes are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.